Welcome to the Thoughtful Leader podcast. My name is Ben Brearley. I'm a leadership coach and the founder of Thoughtful Leader. The Thoughtful Leader podcast is all about short, sharp leadership advice because thoughtful leadership is good leadership. Welcome to episode 339 of the Thoughtful Leader podcast. In this episode, I'm going to pass on some of my tips and ideas for leading more experienced people. And this is a common challenge that many leaders have when they enter leadership roles. So let's get into this one right now. Now, one of the common challenges that you'll have in many leadership roles is that you'll need to lead people of all different levels of experience. Now, as our populations get older around the world and actually our healthcare and ability to live longer is enhanced, you'll actually find that you're more likely to be leading multiple generations in the workplace in your role. So you might have some younger people from 18 on upwards, for example, but then you may even be leading people who are into their 70s or even 80s. Now, I know my dad was actually working till he was 80 years old, still in professional jobs. And so this sort of situation becomes more common as more people are living longer and therefore working longer. So it's not uncommon that you will need to lead people who may have much more experience than you do in a given industry or a given specialty or a given profession. I know some years ago when I was in the consulting space, I once had to go into an organization and lead a program of work. And I was 30 years old at the time. And I was leading people in some teams who were in their 50s and 60s. And so that was a very difficult time because as a consultant, you're obviously an external person as well. And therefore, you're a bit of an outsider. So it can be harder to build that trust. But also, these people were much older than me and had more experience in the industry. So rightfully, they're saying, well, why would we listen to this person? Because they don't really have the experience. So I'm not just going to do what they tell me to do. So I thought it would be useful to provide some tips or ideas or even just ways to think about this sort of challenge. So we know that it's going to be common for older people or more experienced people to be in the workplace for longer. Therefore, you are going to step up into your leadership role. You're going to have to lead these people who may have more experience. So the first tip that I will give you, and it sounds quite obvious, but it is to ask for their opinion. These people are going to have so much experience. It would be foolish to discount all the things that they've been through and just to, dismiss all of their ideas and their expertise. So part of this from a logical perspective is to think, well, logically, if these people have so much experience, I would want to benefit from that experience. So I'm going to ask them their opinion. I'm going to get good input, and therefore I can create the best way forward out of my own opinions, but also these experienced opinions I have around me. So from a logical perspective, it makes good sense. But when you think of it from an emotional perspective, what sometimes happens is we feel hesitant to ask people's opinions because we think as the leader, we should know the answer. I'm in charge of this team. Therefore, I should already know what direction we need to go in. And therefore, I'm just going to tell them what to do. Now, this doesn't really work very well because firstly, it dismisses the experience of the more experienced people in the team. So we all know that as part of motivation, one of the big motivators is really a sense of purpose and actually feeling valued and appreciated and recognized. So one good way to make people feel recognized and appreciated is to ask for their input and ask for their experience. So failing to do that does the opposite. So you might find that your experienced workers actually respond really badly when you don't ask their opinion and they become demotivated because they feel like you don't value them. Another thing that will happen when you ask your older experienced people for their opinion is you start to build trust. Because what happens when you don't ask for opinions is you seem a little bit more self-interested and self-involved. In other words, you think that it's your idea is the only idea that you need to listen to. Don't worry about anyone else because you're focused on your own priorities and ideas. So, when you have a lot of self interest or you're perceived to be self interested, you actually start to erode and destroy trust. And therefore, it's going to be really hard to build trust in your team if you're going to be not asking people's opinions and basically just going your own way all the time. So it's really the number one strategy is to ask people's experience and opinions, get them to share their experience. And what I found in the previous example I shared when I was leading that team full of older workers was that it took a little bit of time for them to warm up to me. They sort of had to see for a while that I wasn't there to just give them orders and direct them to do things. I was actually interested in what they thought so that we could create the solution together. And after that, what I found was they started to take on my opinions more readily because they trusted me more. But if I'd have had that approach straight away to just go my own way, there's no way they would have had that trust to be able to follow my lead. Another thing I'd suggest for experienced people if you're leading them is to think about using their experience in some way in the team as well. So if you have the benefit of having older, more experienced workers and younger people, maybe you can pair them up, get some sort of team mentoring going on where they can share that expertise and basically help other team members get up to speed or improve their experiences. Because one thing I have found as well, and you might have felt it yourself, it makes you feel quite valuable when you can share your experience with others and help them improve. It's something that people often get a lot of a kick out of. And so I would recommend seeing if you can provide opportunities for these older workers or more experienced people to share that expertise. The third thing I'd recommend is you've really got to, it's a fine balance. You've got to really straddle the boundaries of this sort of asking for opinions and taking your own direction quite sensitively. Because what happens if you just defer to the older workers all the time or the more experienced people, you basically erode your own leadership because people just see you as not being able to think for yourself or make decisions. They just think you need their guidance, and therefore you're not really a good leader because you can't make a decision for yourself. So it's a fine balance. And I think one of the best ways to approach this is to work with the team to define some decision-making processes and be quite open about how you're going to make a decision, for example. So if you have to make a decision, you might say, okay, here's my plan. What I want to do is I want to get together. I want to have a discussion about what the best way forward might be based on your experiences, get some pros and cons so we can weigh up the different options, and then I'll take those away and I'm going to go and make that decision. Or you might decide for a certain decision, you know what? You're the team with the most experience. You can actually make the decision. But sometimes you might even say to them, look, in this case, I'm going to make the call. Here's the reasons why I'm going to make the call here. So one of those situations might be, maybe there's a legislation change or there's a compliance requirement or just a directive that's come down that requires a certain course of action. There's not much point workshopping that with the team, even an experienced team, because there's no that they don't really have a say in that. There's no point being so collaborative. And therefore, it's best to just set the guardrails and the guidelines really clearly up front about how you will make the different decisions and how much input you will need from people. Because if you are too much on the line of too collaborative and too inclusive, sometimes people perceive you as not being a strong leader because you don't have your own opinions. But they can also start to expect you to go to them for everything, and they start to have more of a control over how the team operates. And actually, you need to use your formal authority and have that formal authority as well, because you're in that leadership role and ultimately you're going to be accountable for the outcomes of the team. Another thing I would recommend is, and this isn't really an action, it's more of a way of thinking about this situation. So you might find yourself going, well, they're more experienced and qualified, they've had, more experience in the workplace or the industry or in their profession. Why am I the leader? Why wouldn't that person be the leader? Well, what you might actually find is more experienced people, sometimes they're not motivated to be in a leadership role. They don't want that role. And so therefore they're going to back away from that, and they're probably not even going to apply for those roles. So they like to be valued and have an opinion and share their experience, but they don't necessarily want to be in a leadership position. The second thing I'd suggest is just because you have less experience, it doesn't mean that you are less valuable, because you bring other things to your leadership role, like leadership skills. You are potentially good at collaborating. You're good at engaging with people. You might have good people skills, and you create a good environment where people can feel motivated. Perhaps you are good about providing development opportunities for people. So, and maybe planning and strategy. So you've got all these potential strengths that don't need you to be the most experienced person in the room. What you might need is literally to be the one who can extract those good ideas out from the experienced people with you, rather than having to have all the answers yourself. And on that note as well, just a bit of a mindset thing to think about in this situation. Gone are the days where you can really know everything about all the work that gets done in your team. It is quite difficult these days because work has become more complex and the information is everywhere. Everyone has access to information, right? On the internet, through AI, all these sort of technologies. So it's a bit unreasonable to expect that you will have all the answers and you will know everything. What you provide is the process and the guidance and the decision making, without having to be necessarily the most experienced person in your role. And one other thing I'll leave you with here is that when you're in a leadership role, you actually have higher levels of access to senior people in your organization than your team will. So no matter how experienced your team members might be, you will have access to your boss. You will understand what your boss needs. You might have closer links to the executive team and people like that. So actually, you have more organizational context than some of your experienced people might have because of the nature of your role, which means even though they might have strong experience, they don't have necessarily the information that you do from operating at that higher level. And therefore, you bring a different perspective that they might not be appreciating as well. So there's lots of good reasons why you can be in a leadership role and maybe not be the most experienced, but just need to harness the experience of your team. So hopefully you found some of these ideas useful. I'm interested, if you're in this situation or you have been before, I would love to hear your thoughts and comments on this. What strategies did you use to lead your experienced team members? So I would encourage you to leave a comment for me on Spotify or on the show notes page, which will be thoughtfulleader.com/podcast/339 for this episode. And if you like this podcast or this episode, I would love you to leave a positive review on your app of choice. Give me 5 stars because it helps me get the word out about the podcast and get more leaders to listen to it and hopefully help them out with some of the challenges they have as well. So thank you for listening, and I'll be back next week.